Losing someone you love is never simple, but when the loss is through suicide, grief often feels different. Not just sad, not just painful, but confusing, heavy, and sometimes difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. And if that's how you feel, there is nothing wrong with you. This video is here to gently explore why suicide grief can feel so different emotionally, psychologically, and internally, and why your experience deserves understanding, not judgment. One of the hardest parts of suicide grief is the lack of clear answers. The mind naturally tries to make sense of loss. But in this kind of grief, people are often left with questions that don't resolve easily. Why did this happen? Did I miss something? Could I have done more? What did they feel in their final moments? These thoughts are not unusual. They are part of how the brain tries to regain control after something that feels deeply uncontrollable. The mind searches for meaning, even when meaning is not fully available. And that search can become exhausting. Many people experiencing suicide loss carry guilt. Sometimes it is obvious. Sometimes it is quiet and persistent in the background of thoughts. It can sound like, I should have noticed. I should have done something differently. If I had just, maybe things would have changed. This type of guilt is very common in traumatic grief, but it is important to understand something gently here. You are not responsible for someone else's internal pain or decisions. When we lose someone in this way, the mind often creates false responsibility because it feels safer than accepting that some things were beyond our control. But guilt does not equal truth. Suicide grief is often emotionally complex. People may feel sadness, love, anger, confusion, and numbness, sometimes all in the same day. You might miss the person deeply and also feel angry about what happened. You might love them and also feel pain connected to the loss. These contradictions can feel unsettling, but they are normal in traumatic grief. Grief does not follow a single emotion. It moves in layers, and those layers can shift without warning. Another reason suicide grief feels different is because it can feel isolating. Not everyone knows what to say. Some people avoid the topic completely. Others may try to say something comforting, but unintentionally say the wrong thing. And sometimes, the grieving person feels like they have to protect others from their pain. So they stay quiet, or they minimize their feelings, or they carry it alone. This can create a deep sense of emotional loneliness, even when people are physically present. Healing after suicide loss is not a straight path. It does not move neatly from pain to acceptance. Instead, it often comes in waves. Some days feel manageable, other days feel overwhelming without warning. This does not mean you are not healing. It means your mind and body are processing something significant. Grief is not something you get over. It is something you slowly learn to carry differently over time. If you are going through this kind of loss, please remember, there is no correct way to grieve. There is no timeline you need to follow. And there is no version of grief that makes you too much or not enough. What you are feeling is real. It is human, and it deserves space. If this video resonated with you, you are not alone in this experience, and you do not have to navigate it in silence. If you are experiencing this kind of grief, it's also important to understand something gently. Grief after suicide is not just about loss. It can also become a process of trying to make sense of something that feels senseless. And when the mind cannot find clear answers, it may start filling in the gaps with thoughts like, maybe I should have seen it. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I could have changed the outcome. These thoughts can feel very real in the moment, almost like your mind is trying to reconstruct the past in order to regain a sense of control. But they are part of grief processing, not objective truth. The human mind struggles deeply with unanswered endings. We are wired to look for meaning, patterns, and responsibility. So when something happens that cannot be fully explained, the mind often turns inward and asks, "What did I do wrong?" Even when the answer is nothing. Even when there was nothing you could have seen, predicted, or changed. It is also very common for people in this kind of grief to replay memories repeatedly. Small moments can start to feel larger in hindsight. A conversation, a message, a silence that now feels different in memory than it did at the time. This replaying is not a sign that you failed to process the loss. It is the brain attempting to find stability inside something that feels emotionally overwhelming. And it can be exhausting, because instead of allowing the mind to rest, it becomes stuck in loops of what if and if only. Over time, this can also lead to emotional fatigue. Not just sadness, but a deep kind of tiredness that comes from carrying unanswered questions alongside grief. You may notice that some days your mind feels clearer, and other days it becomes heavy again without warning. This is also part of how traumatic grief works. It does not move in a straight line. It moves in cycles. Sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes feeling like nothing is changing at all. And that can be very frustrating for people who expect healing to feel more linear. But healing in this context is not about reaching a point where nothing hurts anymore. It is about slowly building the ability to hold the pain differently, without it overwhelming every part of your day. There is also something important to acknowledge about guilt in this experience. Guilt can sometimes feel like responsibility, but in many cases, it is actually an expression of love that has nowhere to go. The mind tries to turn love into control. If I had done something differently, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But this is a way the mind tries to protect itself from accepting something that feels unbearable. That does not mean the guilt is true. It means the grief is deep. It may help slowly over time to separate what you feel from what is factual. Feelings are real, but they are not always evidence. And in grief like this, feelings can become very loud. Another layer that many people do not talk about is how isolated this kind of grief can feel. Even when people around you care, you may feel like your internal experience is difficult to explain. You might find yourself holding back parts of your pain because you do not want to worry others, or because you feel they will not fully understand. So the grief becomes something carried quietly, not always visible, not always spoken. And that silence can make the experience feel even heavier, because humans are not designed to carry emotional pain completely alone. And yet many people in this situation often do. So if that is your experience, it is important to gently remind yourself that needing support does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. There is also no timeline for when this becomes easier. Some moments may feel manageable, and then unexpectedly something small can bring everything back to the surface again. A place, a date, a memory, a thought you did not expect. This does not mean you are going backwards. It means your mind is still processing something significant. And over time, while the pain may not completely disappear, its intensity can begin to soften. Not all at once, not in a straight line, but gradually, in a way that becomes more bearable. And if there are days where it feels like nothing is changing, that does not mean healing is not happening. Sometimes healing is simply surviving a day that used to feel impossible. And that is still movement forward. You are not alone in this process, even if it sometimes feels that way. And there is no correct way to move through a loss like this, only your way. Please, if you like this video, subscribe and share. Thank you for watching.